We have been talking about a lot of that we should have an assessment framework, we should have a lot of psychometric assessments, and the entire framework of having how much assessments we are attaching to the learning, whether the people are able to forget what they have been learning. However, if we just focus on how they attended the learning, what is the format of that, that is absolutely a separate topic. But if we just are able to connect the learning event with the performance criteria, I think the productivity mapping can be done very easily. Do you think that's something which makes sense, or do you feel that it is a very difficult aspect to map a performance criteria to a learning in the absence of a competency framework? Or it sounds too theoretical, and in a real organization matter, it might be too difficult to have a performance criteria attached to a learning in order to be able to measure the learning productivity. Okay, so that's one thought probably we can, I can leave you with, and that's something basically which you can think about. I go to the slide where I say that learning assurance is something which can be independently traced through learning output, which I was talking about. If you happen to have a competency framework, then absolutely competency assurance is something which can only and only driven by my line managers. Absolutely, if you look at it, I give the agenda of learning to my employees. I give the agenda of competency assurance to my managers. That means if I am automating it, I am looking for a consumer grade tool for my employees, which is going to be my learning assurance framework, which of course one of the element is learning management system. However, if I am looking at competency assurance, that's where 5 people report to me, and I need to make sure that each one of them are competent enough. I need to have good data and good analytics and good system in order to be able to constantly rate them, which is again a bigger topic of performance management, review, feedback, which Gaurav was talking about today in the early morning. And I would basically rather keep it very simple that if we are able to have a tool where the managers are able to very easily grade the employees by looking at an absolute transparent picture of their competency, it is only possible if we have a competency framework. So ideally speaking, we can't do a competency assurance if we do not have a competency framework practically for the managers. So then we should be actually looking out different avenues where competency assurance can be met, or until the time my organization is ready for it, and I am basically able to generate that particular competency assurance. Otherwise, we can absolutely skip this particular element. And the reason why I draw this slide like this is that each one of them can be absolutely adopted independently for our organizations based on the readiness that we have. And which is where basically the module readiness or corporatization of or operationalization of each particular process is important, that we only look at one process and try to automate and see whether we are able to make a complete automation of that particular process. The other topic actually which typically gets, which I think a little bit related to the previous session of onboarding assurance. So practically, okay, this particular tile is just not talking about the interns, but we're talking about end-to-end anybody and everybody that we are hiring, how important it is the time to perfection of that particular employee to be able to generate the quality of work for which he or she has been hired for. And I think that's again a function of how soon, how quickly we can get them up to speed, and what is the framework that we have given to them to be able to do that. Am I able to measure the productivity, and is it a manageable or a useful result that is coming out of it? If it is not coming out of it, there is something that is missing in my learning framework, which I have to go and revisit using these fundamental elements. I think I am towards the, I think this is a summary, basically letting the learner learn their own way to spike user adoption, making sure learning is aligned to organization need, and measuring learning ROI. So the takeaway basically of this session, I would say, is that make sure that we are measuring the learning return on investment by measuring the learning output, making sure that the entire learning framework is aligned to the job that the employee is doing, and at the same time we are giving that particular learning to the employee in a fashion that it interests their attention. And so we basically try out different ways to do it. Of course, gamification is one aspect of it, but I think gamification is probably like big data today, where it is used too many times, but in the end, not many of us basically would know how to implement it. Because of course, it is a very advanced way of doing it, and I don't think we are in a state where each one of our companies, basically organizations, can actually implement a gamified learning system. I think probably we are about 5 years behind, and honestly speaking, it might not make a lot of difference if we implement a gamified system, rather concentrate on this aspect which actually will make a difference. So you will be able to, so this is basically an indirect, subtle gamification concept, but in the end, if we are able to follow this, it will result into which courses are getting the maximum likes. When I'm basically feeding a directional learning out of interest-based analysis, which courses with maximum followers, which courses with maximum reviews, which courses with maximum enrollments. So this is some of the data actually from an absolute learning perspective, which could drive that particular aspect of it, which is again one single aspect from an employee-driven learning. I think I will skip this slide. I have basically used this from a overall perspective of how employees and managers basically can instill and prepare a business case for the decision makers to be able to have a learning framework, which I think each one of you already know it and believe in it, that learning is something which is there to stay, and we need to basically have the best possible futuristic next generation learning framework for our organizations. I am done with my session, and I am absolutely honored if you have a few questions which I can answer.
Questions for a minute? While you're thinking of a question to ask, I have one. You mentioned the learning performance index or learning productivity index.
Yes.
What is that? Is that a numerator divided by a denominator? What is
yes,
that?
I would say the learning output would be when a manager is rating the employee's productivity by the performance criteria, which is tied to his job, and what an employee is rating himself or herself when they are actually doing the learning. So when I am going and doing the learning, I will rate myself, and my manager I will rate it probably from a perspective how much I learned, which is the biggest problem, because how much I learned is not what my organization wants. My organization wants how much I applied. And my manager will always be able to only look at, he will not look at the learning event, he will look at the performance criteria which is mapped to the job. So what was the output? So that probably will be the learning index, which can actually be a real data point for us to be able to see whether the learning framework in my organization is working or not. Yeah.
Good. Another question.
I have a question. When it comes to competencies, right, we have some of them are easily measured, but we have the behavioral competencies that are part of the performance review. How do you address that?
Okay, very interesting question, Newton. Actually, we should probably